Hello, everybody. LC Holt here, and this is my update for the first week of August. Already August, I tell you. It's crazy. Time flies. Today, I'm joined by two of my friends, Rebecca Ivey, who you see many weeks, every week just about on this show, and Chaney Morrow, who's joined us several times before. What's up, guys?
Oh, man.
Glad you're all here. Today, we're going to be trying to do a really broad sort of topic, the career, the films, and in some way, the life of David Lynch. Now, this is going to be, there's a lot to talk about, and there are many different shows I could do based on any one of his films. But today, we're just kind of going to do an overview of David. I mean, David, he was born in Missoula, Montana, January 20th, 1946, which makes him now in his mid-70s, and I hope he lives to be 100. But the way he smokes, who knows? He is a big believer in cigarettes and coffee, and he also loves mounds of dirt, as we've learned from many, many interviews of his. He loves a lot of interesting things, and he's very forthcoming in how he feels about them. He was an Eagle Scout. He is an Eagle Scout, and he was raised in a very sort of suburban, middle American sort of lifestyle, a very family that was, by all accounts, quite moral and traditional. So one wonders, what happened? Because David Lynch evolved into a tremendous artist with an imagination and an ability to create worlds that I am in awe of. I mean, he's one of those people, and we've talked about a few of them on this show, who you can show someone pretty much a frame or two from a film of his, and you could say, yeah, that's a David Lynch movie, which to me is one of the greatest compliments you can pay any filmmaker. And it's certainly true with David. He's a visual artist. He originally wanted to be a painter. You guys probably know that was his ambition. He saw a friend of his father was a professional painter when he was growing up, and he realized, wow, like you could do that for a living? That's amazing. And this became sort of David's ambition. And so he kind of got lessons from his friend's dad, who tutored him a little bit in how to paint. And then David just sort of took off and started doing his own things. And he started painting all kinds of stuff, developing eventually a style that would become very much his own. And he is still a painter. He was also, his father taught him carpentry. And he's still a carpenter. He creates really unusual furniture, David Lynch furniture. I'd love to have some of David Lynch's furniture, quite frankly.
Yeah. Right.
Have you seen some of it? Because it's the furniture. You look at the furniture and you go, "Yeah, that's a David Lynch chair." Too.
Yeah. I've always thought about David Lynch, man, as like the Tom Waits of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Like he is one of a kind. When you well, in his case, when you see it, you know it's him. Just like when you hear Tom Waits, there's only one of him, and they're both American. Came from this, like you said, he was from Missoula, Montana. I think Tom Waits was not too far. I mean, somewhere in the Midwest, But it's amazing. They both have, from what I've read, decent childhoods and stuff, and it's amazing this level of creativity and like individuality they both managed to create for themselves, because there's Lynch and there's Tom Waits, and you can't duplicate either one of them,
And they both have that similar sense of, the darkness and the light. I mean, it's sort of like akin to how I think of Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
His work always went somewhere between the sensual and the spiritual. And you somehow could walk both lines at the same time. Tom Waits is actually a really interesting analogy there. And it's surprising, as much as David loves to work with musicians. I mean, David is a musician himself. He's written many albums, and he's recorded as a vocalist at least 3 albums that I'm aware of. And some of the stuff is very unusual. I mean, it's very good. You wouldn't really think of David Lynch as being a singer. And in a way, he's not a singer. He's more of a performance artist, I think. But some of the songs that he sings are actually really good. There's one that he used in Inland Empire, which is a lesser known film of his, Love is Strange, I think is what it's called. And it's a very Interesting. Really good song, I think. Um, well, you want to start jumping into some of these films because we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
He really started his interest in filmmaking. He said that when he went to art school and that was in Philadelphia. And a lot of people have credited his moving to Philadelphia and living there as being maybe some of the impetus of the themes that he enjoys to explore even to this day. And you could look at it and you could say David Lynch came from Middle America, a very sort of white bread environment. Americana all the way, white picket fences. Then he moved to Philadelphia, which he said was a dark, brooding place full of violence and just an insanity.
Always sunny there, though.
Right. Right. And to hear David Lynch talk about Philadelphia, you would think it was hell incarnate. But in a way, he enjoyed that, he said. And if you look at his work, you can kind of see, David Lynch's films usually explore polar opposites. It's the darkest evil against the most pure, sort of angelic characters. You're either naive or you're malicious. It has that, he likes dealing with those sorts of extremes. And he likes dealing with them in terms of the characters, the themes, and just visually, when you go into a darker part of his world, everything becomes shrouded in black, whereas if you're in the light side, it is the opening of Blue Velvet, with the fire engine that drives by and the guys waving with the Dalmatian on the truck, and, everything's very beautiful and serene and colorful. So when he was in Philadelphia, when he was in the capital of everything that is evil and depraved, according to David Lynch, the city of brotherly love, he did a painting in which he had a garden scene, and it was blacks, and it was all, kind of greens in there for the trees and stuff. And he said that one night I was sitting, and I looked at this painting, and suddenly I heard a wind. And then I started to see the garden begin to move. And I thought, that's something. And so I may go in and out of Lynch from time to time during the show, because it's the only chance it's appropriate for me. But that's essentially what he saw. He saw this painting move, and he thought, how interesting if you could make a moving painting. So he did. He made a painting that you could project on a sculpture of 6 men. It was an animated feature film that was a minute long, and he would project it on the sculpture of these guys, and the projection would make the sculpture vomit, and it was called 6 Men Getting Sick.
Yeah, I just heard about that. I was just reading about that, actually.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting to see clips from it, and that was in essence his first film. It was a moving painting, but it was his first film.
Yeah.
And he did several of these, eventually working more into a narrative type structure with a short film he did called The Grandmother, which is very, very interesting. Combination of live action and animation. And he painted the inside of his house black, and his wife at this time was just like, okay, David, whatever you want to do. So he just painted the inside black, and people would ask him, well, why did you paint every room black? And he said, well, if it's black in the background, then you can see what's in the foreground, and he's got a point there. Yeah, he wanted you to focus on what he wanted you to focus on. But this short film, The Grandmother, got him noticed and actually got him a chance to go to AFI, the American Film Institute in California. People would send in their films as sort of like proof of the kind of work they were attempting to do, and AFI would pick a certain number of people to come out and be sort of like fellows at their facility. And that year they picked 2 people, and one of those people was David Lynch, based on the Grandmother. So he proceeded to pack up his wife and his small child, his daughter Jennifer, who later became a director in her own right. And Yeah, she's a very, very good director. She does a lot of television and stuff. She did that movie Boxing Helena, which that is a show in and of itself as well.
Yeah, that was way ahead of its time too. It really was. Like it was so weird at the time, nobody liked it. You go back at it now, knowing it's Jennifer Lynch, it all kind of makes sense.
It
You're
really
like,
does.
of course, this, yes, I love it.
And of course, that film had such controversy with the Kim Basinger thing and all the, all that came from it. So Jennifer Lynch kind of went through her trial by fire early in her directing career as well. I think it's safe to say that David Lynch's trial by fire took about 4 years, 4.5 years, because it was at AFI when he began work on a movie called Eraserhead, which was based, it wasn't even a script. He wrote it sort of like a poem, like a very, very short, it was like 10 pages long. It was like an outline with a couple little hints of dialogue. And he started shooting it, and this started to expand. And then he started to create this whole world in which these characters would exist on the campus of AFI. They had some stables in the back, and he would build all these sets for Eraserhead, and then when they were ready, they would shoot. And he was sleeping there, and they were getting basically reels of film that other people had thrown away. They would shoot a certain amount of the reel, and then they would throw it away, and David would go through the garbage cans, and he'd get the film that wasn't exposed, and they would use it for Eraserhead. He did one of the funnier stories is that he had a paper route, and he would run the paper route, and this is one way he would get money to sort of get a little bit more film, and then develop this film, and then so it took many, many years to build all these sets and create from scratch the world of Eraserhead. He met an actor named Jack Nance, who of course would star in Eraserhead as the character of Henry, and would go on to work with David until Jack Nance's death in 1997. They did a lot of movies together, and they were good friends in real life, all the way up until Jack Nance's death. In fact, the only movie that they did not do together was The Elephant Man, but we'll get to that here shortly. Have you guys seen Eraserhead?
It's been a long time, but yeah.
I watched. I tried to watch it in high school, could not finish it. There's actually several of his movies that I couldn't quite dig into.
Mm-hmm.
But Eraser was so long ago, man. I mean, I barely remember that one, but that was shit, man. That was 25 years ago when I tried to watch that. It's when, all the film students in high school, the name David Lynch got going around. So everybody wanted to, I'm going to watch Lynch. And I think at that point, Lost Highway was his latest.
Yes. Yes.
Seen that. I tried to watch Eraserhead. I'm like, I don't get this guy. I like it, kind of. Maybe I don't. But I liked his style. I like the fact that they were both so strange. And I love the fact that this was kind of an ordinary American dude capable of all this weirdness.
Yeah.
I liked it, but I did not finish Eraserhead.
Yeah, Eraserhead is what David Lynch called a dream of dark and disturbing things. He is very evasive about what his films are really about. And I think that's one of the qualities of him that makes him so unique. There's only a few other people I can think of who are as evasive as Lynch is. I mean, Eraserhead, in a nutshell, I mean, his daughter, Jennifer, who was born with severe club feet, has said that she feels that Eraserhead is about her father's dread of being a young dad. And that the child that Henry has in the movie, which is deformed, severely deformed, she thinks that represents her own deformities as a child, being born with these severe club feet that had to be corrected early in her life through surgery. And so her interpretation of Eraserhead is that it is her father's feelings about being married young, having an unexpected child, who had severe health issues, physical issues. And I can actually see her point of view there when she lays it all out like that. You go, yeah, well, yeah, I can kind of see that Henry is sort of like David Lynch, and the wife, got pregnant, and or Mary X, the character of Mary X, got pregnant, and yeah, that could be sort of like, the unexpected child David was not really.
I watched an interview with David Lynch today in preparation. They asked him about Eraserhead, and the guy, I think his name was like Mike, that British fellow, Mike Dratton. Anyway, he asked him, was he the Eraserhead? Like was he the lead? And he said, these are his words. He says, no, but I identified with him. He said, we're different in many ways, but I did identify with him. I'm like, okay, neat. So yeah, maybe that was the answer. Maybe this was because being a young married father, man, that's some scary shit.
Well, and that was another thing that, Lynch has always been very evasive about, Eraserhead in particular. He talked about opening the Bible one day and seeing a Bible verse. He never says what it is, but he said when he saw this Bible verse, it told him what Eraserhead was. And I'm very curious to know what Bible verse that was. And, because
he's gonna have to tell me, man, I can't comb that thing looking for it,
I know. It's like,
dude.
Sometimes you just want to go up to David and say, could you just whisper it in my ear? But on the other side of that, it's kind of, the mystery is intriguing, and you do kind of wonder, is David right? Because David says if you know everything, then perhaps you're not going to enjoy the process as much. That maybe it would take something away from the movie if you knew everything.
It's sort of like songwriters. There's some that'll tell you what the heck their songs are about in great detail, but like Bob Dylan, he doesn't like to really
Yeah.
It's, what do you think it's about? Because sometimes what you come up with is probably better than what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
and if you knew what it was about, it would probably disappoint you and make you not like it.
You're right. Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be said there in terms of Lynch as well. It's interesting. One of the people that I talked about who liked ambiguity and never liked to talk about where the source of his inspiration or what the meaning of his films was Stanley Kubrick, who we discussed on the previous show. Now, Stanley, like David, loves ambiguity. It's also interesting that when Stanley Kubrick was making The Shining, which we talked about last week, the one movie that he showed to the cast and crew saying, I want my film to feel like this, was Eraserhead, because Stanley Kubrick was a huge fan of Eraserhead. I don't know about later films in David Lynch's career, but Kubrick loved Eraserhead. I think that if, moving on from that first film and moving on into something like The Elephant Man, say, which The Elephant Man is a job he got because Mel Brooks saw Eraserhead and was like, David, you're crazy. I love you. You're going to direct this movie. And that's how he got the job directing the story of John Merrick. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was going to say, this is the movie growing up that I watched multiple times. This is the one my mom always would put on TV constantly, was Elephant Man.
John Hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And Anthony Hopkins.
Yep.
Yes. And again, very much a David Lynch movie when you look at it. I mean, obviously, like Eraserhead, it was shot in black and white. That's not something David Lynch has really done much since. But the black and white photography of both of those films is really pretty stunning. I love a good black and white film if it's shot and made well. I think there's something about the depth, especially when you're shooting on film, because black and white is different on film than on video. When you get black and white on film and the blacks are true, unexposed, negative blacks, that's a different thing than video blacks, which are never really true black, But I love, Eraserhead is a fantastic film. I think it really helped David Lynch become what you would think of as a mainstream director, because they got Academy Award nominations. I know that Lynch himself wanted to do the makeup for the Elephant Man, but I guess in preparation for his first major film and everything, he just didn't have the time to do. I would love to have seen what his makeup for, Merrick would have looked like, but he just didn't have the time to do that and co-write the script and direct the movie. But again, yeah, I mean, I love Eraserhead. I think, in some ways, Eraserhead and The Elephant Man are sort of, they're sort of two sides of the same coin. They would be a good double feature, because Eraserhead sort of exists in its own universe, and even though Elephant Man does exist in the past and is very period accurate, you can kind of see it as existing in a similar world, I think, to Eraserhead, and not just because they're both in black and white. Now, one of the things I really wanted to talk, especially with Rebecca, about here is that after The Elephant Man, David Lynch was considered by George Lucas to direct the Return of the Jedi.
Which I would love to see that version. I want to see that movie. I want to see it. I want to see it.
I thought that was like a rumor, or like just I had no idea.
Yeah, David Lynch. If you ever get to see an interview with him where he talks about it, it's really fascinating because he talks about how George Lucas took him out to Skywalker Ranch and drove him around in one of his cars, and Lynch said he was terrified the whole time because George Lucas drives really fast, and he was hanging on for dear life. And he said that George Lucas took him into a place and showed him concept drawings that had already been worked up for Return of the Jedi, and amongst them being the Ewoks. And Lynch said that throughout this day of going through these materials, he said he had this headache that just kept growing and growing and growing. And he just could not imagine himself doing this. He said he had zero interest and couldn't see anything he could contribute himself to this project. So he went back home, and his agent said, "Man, this is a tremendous opportunity to direct a Star Wars film. Are you sure that you don't want to do this?" And David Lynch was like, "You just have to be polite and tell him I can't do it. I just can't do this." And so that's why he did not direct the Return of the Jedi. However,
mad props for him. That's awesome.
Oh yeah.
Think about the payday and stuff, but it's not. He creates his own universe. He don't want to step.
He did Dune instead.
He did Dune. Yes, that's right. He did Dune.
Now, that was its own universe. It's its own galaxy. Dune, right? That's his Star Wars.
Yes, and I think that's
the thing. He wanted more.
Yes,
he didn't want to be told, "This is it. It's already set out. There you go."
Which is what he would have gotten. Yeah.
Ring into someone else's, And plus, I mean, think of what's to lose. Like, people hate it. People don't like it. And, he's a man of a specific vision in it. And I don't see Star Wars in there, even back then,
Although I do wish George would have been like, "Go do Return of the Jedi. Do your version." I would love to see that, though. I wonder what that insanity would have been.
Yeah, I think so. That would
Vader
be really...
would have been Elephant Man. Okay.
No. I think it's fascinating. The idea of it is really fascinating. I think in some ways I mean, with Frank Herbert's Dune, it was David Lynch's to do kind of what he wanted to with it, but he did not have final cut. It was a huge, huge budget. It was a Dino De Laurentiis film, and it was meant to be an epic. It was meant to be like a Star Wars type hit film. And then you got David Lynch, who is this very esoteric artist, and he's doing his version of Dune. The whole experience apparently was horrible. He has said that it's the only film that he's made that he was not proud of, which is interesting because if you watch Dune, there's nothing really intrinsically wrong with Dune. Mm-hmm. It's clearly not what Lynch wanted. I mean, he was recut and a lot of things were changed. And from that day forward, he never did another film unless he had final cut in his contract. But to Dino De Laurentiis' credit, it's like what Dino said. He never gave final cut because he said if he gave final cut to one director, I must give it to all directors. And so he would never actually put that in a contract. And he's certainly not going to do it on a film as big budget as Dune. which had an all-star cast, Sir Patrick Stewart, and of course, Sting in his in his kind of metallic tidy whities. So many. Dean Stockwell, who we would later go on to work with. Jack Nance was back in this in a small part. And we must not leave out Kyle McLaughlin.
Yes.
Who would become David Lynch's avatar for several years to come. They made a hell of a team, Kyle McLaughlin and David Lynch. And this was McLaughlin's first real movie. I mean, he was starring in this huge epic film shot on a grand scale down in Mexico. And he was front and center in it. It's a fascinating book series, Dune. I haven't read them all. The mythology behind them are really interesting. And once you sort of become familiar with it, you see how much Dune has influenced other science fiction, especially universes. And I can see why David Lynch was interested in it, because Dune is very esoteric as a book. It's not like, you know, spaceships and laser beams. There's a lot going on under the surface in those books. And I can see the marriage between Frank Herbert and David Lynch being successful creatively. And I think in a lot of ways, I don't know, what do you guys think? I think it was pretty successful as a film in terms of being, you know, artistically fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was, you know, it's not my favorite sci-fi film. I give it its credit for the universe created, the length of time, the cast. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I don't think like when I think that he doesn't like it, I do kind of wonder why.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, I mean, it makes me wonder, be like, damn, well, what would you have done differently? Like with what we got now, what would he have changed to satisfy himself, you know, with for like final cut per se?
I would like to see the director's
I'm curious,
cut.
like what did he not like about it? You know, that's who I want to like really talk to. I mean, like, what did you not like about it, David? And when he couldn't get final cut, maybe that you know, took some of the wind out of his sails, but I think it built a world, and I can't believe it took as long as it did to give another, right? With Denis Villeneuve, with this new Dune movie. I mean, that's a risk they're taking, I think, kind of like well, Blade Runner did well, to make a sequel so far afterwards. It's going to have to pay some tribute to the original, or it's going to lose people. Otherwise, it would have been just, damn, man, you're too late. You know.
Well, I mean, something that fascinates me about, you know, film studios when they decide to adapt the work of people like Frank Hubbard or people like Philip K. Dick, and they're like, we want this to be Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I'm like, guys, neither of those.
Did you not read it?
Yeah. I mean, there are many things. I mean, if you want to have this huge, crowd-pleasing, mainstream thing, you know, adapted Dan Brown novels.
Michael Crichton.
Comic book, you know, that's always been big.
Yeah, do a comic book. You know, don't pick these people who had very specific, very artistic sort of vision of the world and their work and say, well, let's make that into, you know, I mean, I like Total Recall, the movie, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, don't get me wrong. But, you know, that's one of the, maybe the rare exceptions where perhaps it worked to change the material to suit that. Most of the times it doesn't work. You know, I mean, Blade Runner, the reason Blade Runner is so good is because it's so true to the vision of Philip K. Dick, you know, and of course it wasn't commercially successful in its time. And the new Blade Runner, which I thought was incredible.
It's a great movie, really great film.
Very true to the world that Ridley Scott created, and very true to the Philip K. Dick essence, you know. But when you do that, you can't expect it to be necessarily mass market. And I think maybe that's where some of the disappointment on Dino De Laurentiis' side with the 1984 version of Dune you know, you. But at the same point, Dino, you did pick a book that is, as I said, very esoteric, and you tried to make it into something that kids 12 years old would want to go see. That's not really going to work. And then you hired David Lynch to adapt it and turn it into a direct it. You know what I mean?
Did he hear that Lucas had him out at the ranch? And he's like, Lucas wants him for Star Wars. He'd be perfect because I want a Star Wars.
Yes, I must have him for the Dune.
Yes.
With Kel McLaughlin, because that's what
That's
they
right.
always do. David Lynch used to say, he used to call, I guess he still does, he calls Kyle McLaughlin Kale McLaughlin, because he said that's how Dino De Laurentiis pronounced. He couldn't say Kyle, so he would always just say Kale. And so now David Lynch calls him
I'm
Kale.
like Hartman, like Cal.
Yeah, Kale.
Cal.
But I mean, I was talking about the final cut thing with Dino. Even though the Dune thing didn't really work out and wasn't creatively fulfilling, David Lynch did have a script for a smaller film called Blue Velvet, and he showed it to Dino. And Dino was like, "Oh, I'm very interested in this." But David Lynch said, "Okay, dude," I'm sure he didn't say it like that. He was like, "All right, Dino, listen. If I make this film, I'm going to need to have final cut this time." And Dino was like, I'm acting out the scene for you. "I do not give final cut. Give to one director, must give to all."
And this all took place at his favorite restaurant,
Bob's Big Boy.
Big Boy. I was waiting for it.
Right. Over milkshakes and hamburgers.
That's right.
And then David said, I was there, so I know how to swim. But then David said, "All right, Dino, but we got to do a handshake now, and we'll seal the deal. But I'm going to have final cut." And Dino was like, "I'm not put in contract, but yes, you have final cut." And that's how Blue Velvet got made. And David Lynch got to make the film exactly the way he wanted, with the inimitable Dennis Hopper as Frank Booth. One of the all-time great villains, you know. The man will fuck anything that moves. I mean, what else do you need to say, right?
I don't give a damn fucking anything that moves.
And that's really fascinating. The whole thing with the face mask, you know. David,
That's the first I've ever seen that. Ever.
and who would think of that other than David Lynch? Now, Lynch's original idea was that he was going to have helium in that tank, so that when Dennis Hopper took the big hit, this squeaky voice would come out.
Great.
Dennis Hopper kind of nixed that idea and changed it to nitrix, you know, just to say that you would get, you know, sort of some sort of a hit, like a buzz, a high off of it. But if you think about David Lynch's original idea in terms of what the character says after he would have taken a hit of helium, it actually makes a lot of creepy sense. Because remember when Frank Booth takes the hit and he turns his attention to Dorothy, he starts saying things like, "Daddy wants to fuck, give Daddy," you know, and he starts holding her, you know, grabbing her, and goes into this child mode. Now imagine if he had been saying that with a high-pitched little boy's voice, like the original conception. That would have made it all the more terrifying, you know.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish they had gone with the helium.
When you said the helium, I was thinking, oh, we're going with the Twin Peaks sequel movie, that kind of creepy and that, you know.
Yeah.
That whole.
Yeah, the kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes you feel a little dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a lot of things about Blue Velvet that might make you feel a little dirty.
Yes.
But it's just so damn good. And again, so original. And again, starring Kyle McLaughlin. Kale. As Jeffrey Beaumont. And I think, you know, whenever I watch Blue Velvet, it's set in the fictional town of Lumberton. And I always look at this and I go, this is the proto Twin Peaks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of things about Blue Velvet make me think of what would later become Twin Peaks. Lumberton is kind of like that town. Jeffrey Beaumont, the Kel McLaughlin character, you could easily see Jeffrey Beaumont growing up to be something like Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks, who was the character that McLaughlin played there. the Frank Booth character would not necessarily be out of place in Twin Peaks. And also the sort of idea behind the movie where you had this suburban dream against the wrong side of the tracks nightmare. You know, the idea that you're living in a small town where everything apparently is safe, but somewhere in that small town, there's a guy like Frank Booth who is as evil as they come and is manipulating this horrible woman and holding her husband for ransom and her child, and he's cutting off the guy's ear and giving it to her, and the whole time Frank thinks that he's in love with this Dorothy lady, and his version of love is raping her nightly. And you go, yeah, it's pretty terrifying, you know. I know, it kind of makes you wonder. And then that was sort of Lynch's thing. Again, we go back to this whole idea of pulling, the rug looks really pretty and nice, but you pull back the rug and what's underneath it, It's like the opening.
Switch from the helium to, the nitrous. That was, you said Dennis Hopper influenced that decision?
Dennis Hopper, yeah. Was
maybe he just had a tank in his trailer, like, hey, you know what I got right here, Pabst Blue Ribbon.
I know. Yeah.
It was Dennis Hopper, man. He could party. He was a fantastic actor, but that dude could party. It wouldn't blow my mind that he just had a nitrous tank laying around.
And this was right on the tail end of all of Hopper's problems, when like his career was gone. His career was kaput. Nobody wanted to hire him. So right in the mid 80s, Blue Velvet came out in 86. That was that time period when Hopper came back big time, and was like showing people, okay, I'm sane, I'm clean, I'm sober. And he did like, Hoosiers. He did Blue Velvet.
Fantastic in that too, dude. I believe he was nominated for that Best Supporting Actor for Hoosiers. He was fantastic in that, dude.
To say,
wow.
You didn't bring up Isabella Rossellini.
Isabella Rossellini, who would be David Lynch's significant other for several years after the making of Blue Velvet. She's fantastic as Dorothy. Yes. We also have to point out Laura Dern, who really got her start and has been kind of partnered up with David Lynch ever since. They've worked together off and on in future films, which hopefully we'll get into. I hate to move off of Blue Velvet, but in order to squeeze in some of these others, like I was saying, this is an overview show, so we're going to kind of move through his whole oeuvre as quickly as we can. But I am going to have to skip over Twin Peaks, because Twin Peaks I can't cover on this show. It's just too. I'm going to do a whole like show on Twin Peaks, but we'll just put Twin Peaks aside, because that came after Blue Velvet and before Wild at Heart, which Wild at Heart is. I'll be honest with you, it's probably my least favorite of David Lynch's films. I really like the book by Barry Gifford, but the film I think doesn't hold together very well. It's packed dense, full of all kinds of crazy shit. Like you're never bored during Wild at Heart, that's for sure. But I think maybe it's a little too packed for me. I don't know. You have Nicolas Cage, Laura Dern, yet again, as Sailor and Lula. But I don't know. What do you guys think? And, of course, Willem Dafoe in one of his all-time great villain roles with his teeth sticking out. What are your thoughts on Wild at Heart?
It's not one that when you bring up David Lynch that I automatically start talking about. You usually hit Twin Peaks, Blue Velvet, Eraserhead. I'll hit Elephant Man, but that one I usually don't really. I'm not like, let's talk.
I snuck to watch it as a kid, and I don't think I understood it. But I definitely watch it again, because the more I think about it, I'm like, damn, I think I did enjoy it, but I had to sneak to watch it. It was like Cinemax late at night. Like I woke up late just to watch TV.
I think it's one I need to revisit as well. It's been a while. But like I said, it's not one where you're like, oh, I need to watch this again. To me,
Yeah.
it wasn't. It wasn't something like, that I can watch over and over.
And again, like I say, it's not boring. It's definitely interesting. It's compulsively watchable if you can get through. I mean, sometimes Nicolas Cage is a little cringy in it. I just have to admit.
I mean, I have to admit that's part of the I wasn't going to bring that up, but yes, Nicolas Cage is,
I mean, Nicolas Cage is not quite turned up to full tilt boogie in Wild at Heart, but he's just shy of it. And whenever Nick Cage gets to full tilt boogie, it's very hard for me to get through. I mean,
we had a lot of conversations about that at lunch. Nick Cage.
When you get into like Nick Cage and the Vampire's Kiss and shit like that, I just can't take it. I mean, if it's Nick Cage and Leaving Las Vegas, I can take it.
Yes.
But if we get into like Peggy Sue Got Married, no, I can't take it.
And the thing is, I love that movie except for his freaking voice. He gets on my nerves in that movie. I hate to say that, but I love that movie.
It's a great film. He is cringy.
And you're like, don't go back to him. No. Remember at the end, and you're like, no.
Right. Yeah.
Really tried. He really went over the top early on in his career, and Wild at Heart was definitely one of them. And Vampires one of them. But it blows my mind though that I guess back then it makes sense that Nick Cage was in a Lynch movie, but I don't think that would happen now. I think I don't know if David Lynch is such hands-on director when it comes to acting. I don't think he gives Kyle McLaughlin like line readings or anything. I think he really does trust them. But a cat like Cage is probably hard to wrangle, because he'll go big, and McLaughlin is he's kind of like Lynch, he's reserved. McLaughlin did a film called The Trigger Effect, which is grossly underrated. Love it. And I'm glad that it took Lynch gave him leading roles for years, man, to put him in everybody's heads, because McLaughlin is fantastic. And though him and Cage are different, I see Lynch, his attraction to McLaughlin, as that makes more sense than to him to repeat work with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
And with the movie, maybe Lynch maybe it wasn't I don't know if he enjoyed the experience or not, but that falls low on the belt probably.
Yeah.
You bought that book for me one year for my birthday.
Yes.
And it was him on the cover, and I was kind of like, I couldn't deal with I remember you were like, ignore the cover.
Right. Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, because the book is really quite good. It was brought to Lynch by a friend of Lynch named Monty Montgomery, who would go on to be the cowboy in Mulholland Drive. But Monty Montgomery is also a film director, and he wanted to direct Wild at Heart as a film. And he said, David, would you produce this for me? Put your name on it. I could maybe get it made with your name on it. And David was like, well, Monty, what if I read it and I want to direct it? And Monty was like, well, I guess you'll direct it. And that's what happened. David read it and wanted to direct it. But anyway, let's move on to one of my personal favorites. Now, this is maybe not one of the best known in his oeuvre. I just like saying that word. I think it's the second time I've done it. But Lost Highway is one of my all-time favorite films, I must admit. I really love Lost Highway. It is a really twisted, dramatic horror film. It's kind of the first film in a series where David Lynch started to explore the duality of a person. I mean, really, if you look at Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive, they're kind of similar, only the two things are reversed. Half the film is apparently reality or some distorted version of reality, and then the other half is the fantasy, what's going on inside the character's mind. With Lost Highway, the first part of the film is apparently some distorted version of the true story of Fred Madison, played by Bill Pullman, his actual life. And then the second half is some sort of fantasy that's existing inside Bill Pullman's mind, in which he imagines himself as a younger, more sexually virile guy who, you know, gets the girl instead of loses the girl, and protects the girl instead of, you know, falling limp, no pun intended, with the girl. You know, so it's him imagining this alternate universe. Apparently, when he's in his jail cell, after having killed his own wife. And David Lynch has later said in interviews that he thinks one of the things that really inspired this film for him was the O.J. Simpson trial. Lynch said that when he was watching the trial, he saw O.J. Simpson, and he said that to him, it is a man who had murdered two people. And he said, how do you go on with your life having known that you brutally butchered your wife? And he thought, well, the only way a person could probably really do that is to convince themselves that they haven't done it. Somehow convince yourself that it was someone else's fault. And that led into the story of Lost Highway, in which you have, you know, the Bill Pullman character who has apparently done this awful thing to his wife, murdered her out of jealousy and rage over his own impotency. And yet he imagines this character, this mystery man character, played by Robert Blake, who would incidentally go on to kill his wife.
Isn't that wild? I was going to bring that up. Isn't that fucking crazy?
Yeah. What's even
looking in that too, Robert Blake. His
Yeah.
face, fucking haunting.
He's
That's
terrifying.
Most about the movie is his face.
He is one of the more terrifying characters I've seen in movies, honestly. Robert Blake.
I was gonna go ahead. Sorry.
No, go.
I was going to say I was watching. I mean, I hadn't seen it forever, but Bill Pullman and Sleepless in Seattle. When I was watching it with someone, and we were just brought up. The person I was watching with brought up that he said, you know, this guy has done like such a wide, you know, vast, you know, he has done a little bit of everything, and he's good at everything he's been in, but no one really talks about him.
That's
you
true.
know, it's not like he's so underrated with what
Hey,
he what he's
like,
done.
Real people know exactly who Bill Pullman is. You know what I mean? Like we know who he is, man.
Yeah,
He's fantastic.
but I mean,
He's
he.
world-class supporter, man, and even a leading man. Shit,
Yeah,
like
that's what I'm saying. He went when we were watching Sleepless in Seattle, and you're watching the role he's in. You're thinking, well, he's a leading man, but they have him in. You know, shouldn't he be the? You know, but he pulls that role off. But you're still, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's kind of a popcorn flick, but you know, it's still, you know, he's good in everything he's in.
He is.
He plus, man.
Yes, he is absolutely, and he's terrific in Lost Highway.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Lynch said that he cast him because he looked at Bill Pullman and he thought this guy could play a man in trouble, and who's in over his head. And Fred Madison as a character is certainly a man in trouble who's in over his head, who apparently quite mysteriously reappears at the end of the film when this fantasy of his is broken down, which again is another sort of, you could say the same thing about the ending of Mulholland Drive. You know, the ending is quite horrible and abrupt, and it happens right after the fantasy breaks down. These films, to me, are brother and sister films, Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. You know,
the only sort of like Elephant Man and.
Yes, in a sense, like, and maybe a great double feature, Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. Yeah, and they're also of Lynch's films the two most, I think, even though they are incredibly mysterious and have all these jagged puzzle pieces, you can make sense of those two movies. If you sit down and think about it, they make sense. It's just things are mixed up, and some is real and some is fantasy, but it's pretty clearly delineated. Like in Mulholland Drive, you know when the fantasy begins. I mean, the start of that movie, you see a woman, you see the point of view of someone's face going down into a pillow, And then the dream begins. And the whole first half of the movie is this fantasy world that Naomi Watts has created for herself. And then the inverse of Lost Highway, the second half of Mulholland, is the true story. It's what's actually happened to her, which is this horrible, tragic story of this woman that came to Hollywood who thought she was going to make it, fell in love with a lady, and then the woman throws her over for this film director to help her career. And then she's in poverty, she's poverty stricken, she's apparently on drugs, she's heartbroken, and it ends with a horrible suicide, essentially, you know? And I think that's why Mulholland Drive, which began its life as a failed ABC pilot, it was going to be a TV series. And man, I tell you, I'm glad it did not end up as a TV series.
They would have tried to water that down.
Yes. Yeah. I think the best thing that ever happened to Mulholland Drive was when the people at ABC didn't get it, you know, and said, we don't want to do this. And then Canal Plus put up the money to complete it as a feature film. And this movie I remember when Mulholland Drive came out, it was a big deal. There were awards, there were nominations everywhere for the Golden Globes, for the Academy. People really reacted to Mulholland Drive.
It's the story of Hollywood. We see the shiny, beautiful part. We don't see the...
And it is a quite emotionally arresting movie. I mean, you do have a reaction at the end of the movie.
That cover of Roy Orbison's Crying.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, yeah. Rebecca Del Rey does a great cover, a Spanish language version of Crying. And she would later reappear in David Lynch's third season of Twin Peaks, where she does another great song that he wrote called, of course, David Lynch didn't write Crying. That's Roy Orbison's song. But he wrote a song called No Stars, Lynch did, which she performs in the third season of Twin Peaks. She's fantastic. She's fantastic in that as well. But let's talk for a second about Mulholland Drive. And for those Lynchian folks, I did not forget about the Straight Story. I just jumped over to Mulholland Drive because I felt like Lost Highway and Mulholland were, you know, kind of brother sister to one another. So it just made sense to transition over. Also, for one of the first movies I saw Justin Theroux in was Mulholland Drive. And he's gone on to be a screenwriter. He's written several movies for Ben Stiller. He wrote the second Iron Man.
Ray Cyrus was in that too.
Say that again?
Ray Cyrus was in Mulholland Drive. Yeah.
He sure was.
I was going to point out that Lynch has my kind of taste in casting a thing. Is, as far as I know, like he met Billy Ray Cyrus and said, you know, hey, I want to have you in a movie. Or the guy said, I want to be in a movie. I'll give you a part. But then, like, throw in Richard Pryor, even Robert Blake. You know what I mean? He wasn't huge. Oh my God, I love a director that's not star hunting.
Yes,
you know, love it. And like for even Pryor to be thrown in there, you know what the fuck is Richard Pryor? But I love it. Sweet, keep it going. And Billy Ray Cyrus, you know, he is what he is. But I am happy. It makes me smile that he was in it.
And you know, it also plays it.
David, cool, man. Good for you, dude.
David loves to cast musicians. Have you noticed this? You go from Sting to Julie Cruz.
I was going to say, do you think it's his interest in music?
Yeah.
His writing,
I think so, yeah, because a lot of the people who he casts are people, well, Billy Ray Cyrus aside, they're people who...
Ricky Hart.
They're
my jam.
They're people whose music he's used in his own movies. Of course, Julie Cruz, he wrote albums for her. That Angelo Badalamenti, his great composer, who we cannot do a David Lynch show without mentioning Angelo Badalamenti, who began composing for David Lynch on Blue Velvet and has continued with him ever since. But I mean, like Chris Isaac and Fire Walk with Me. Marilyn Manson was in Lost Highway. So yeah, it just sort of has this continuing trend. And the third season of Twin Peaks is just crammed full of musicians. Every single episode ends with somebody performing at the
Bowie.
Roadhouse.
Forgot
Bowie,
And,
yes. Fire Walk with Me. Yep. And he's also in the 3rd season of Twin Peaks, sort of.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
sort of,
he was too ill to be in it, but his character is in it in a way, that's really interesting. But then again, Frank Silva, who played Killer Bob, died years before, and he is also in the 3rd season of Twin Peaks and factors into it quite heavily, actually. And you see him. I mean, he's in it. But even though he died years before. I want to say again, Jack Nance, the great star of Eraserhead, passed away right after Lost Highway. He died rather mysteriously. There are different stories about how he died. He said that he went to a donut shop and was assaulted by some young punk, and he hit him in the head. And then Jack Nance said and then Nance went to bed and then died in his sleep, subsequent to a head wound. Other people said that Jack was a raging alcoholic. Jack had gone through a lot in his life, including having his last wife called him up and said, "I'm killing myself," and then proceeded to do so while he was on the set of a movie. And he blamed himself for that. And Jack had an interesting kind of troubled life. But he ultimately died of a head injury, whether it was from a fall, from drinking, or whether it was from a young punk in a donut shop.
Yeah, who else did that, man? William Holden.
Yes, you're right.
Got hammered, fell down, busted his head, and died that way.
Yeah, died that way. Well, I mean, it's sad that it wasn't because he was drinking, but Leonard Cohen died from a fall in his home, which, again, it's very tragic. But let's not forget the Straight story. I want to throw that in there.
Favorite, man.
Richard.
Yes, my personal favorite of his.
I was going to say, Richard Farnsworth. I love him.
Yes.
It's by far his most aesthetically beautiful flick. And to go back to his casting, it's the last time you ever saw Everett McGill in a movie. The last time. Like, he just stopped. I loved Everett McGill. I thought he was great. It's the last thing I think he ever acted in.
I must ask you this, Chaney. Have you seen the 3rd season of Twin Peaks?
I have not. Is McGill in it?
He came out of retirement to do the 3rd season.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So you're
check it out.
You're gonna have to watch it because his character does return, and he's not in the whole thing, but he's in quite a few episodes, and they do resolve his whole character arc from the show, which I'm so glad that McGill came back because I hadn't seen him in years, and I'm a huge fan of his. And
I was gonna say, Straight Story was Richard Farnsworth's last movie before he passed away.
Yeah.
He actually killed himself, remember? Farnsworth had killed himself. Blew his off, I think.
Yeah, he did. He
had
from
cancer, I believe, at the time. It was like an old school dude's way of like going out, which is still so unfortunate. But
I mean, Farnsworth was a real life cowboy, I mean, he was
right, man.
I just love the way he delivers lines. I mean, the first thing I saw him when I was a little kid, it was the Anne movies, and then Misery.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. And then
Well, this is one of those unique opportunities, and occasionally it comes around. It came around, say, with Burt Reynolds. It's come around with a couple other people. It came around with Jerry Lewis. But occasionally, a really great actor will get that one last movie before they go, in which you see just how great they were. And Richard Farnsworth got that with the Straight Story. He played Alvin Straight. And it is a true story of a man who could no longer drive because of his legs just weren't working the way they used to. So he decided to hop on his lawnmower and travel across state lines in order to see his brother one last time before his brother passed away. And Mary Sweeney, who was one of David Lynch's wives, the mother of one of his children, and also his former editor, she pointed out to David Lynch this story, and she was working on a script about this true story of the Straight brothers. And David said, when it's done, show it to me. And Mary Sweeney did that. And David read the script and just fell in love with it. And it's totally different than what you would think David Lynch would necessarily fall in love with. But
It's so light driven. Like there was so much sunlight in the movie. And then when there was darkness, there was a really great, sweet conversation, where he's like roasting hot dogs on the fire. He's like, I got some dogs. Man, and not to skip to the end of the film, but man, when he shows up and sits there with Harry Dean Stanton, the most beautiful goddamn things I've ever seen in my life, ever. I could watch that bit over and over because they don't even speak to each other, man. I think Stanton has like 3 lines or something. It's just so beautiful. And it's not your typical Lynch, but it really shows you the power of a director that knows what he's doing, that understands a story. Because and it's dry. Most people will say it's boring. Man, I couldn't get enough of it. I loved it.
To me, like, The Stray Story really represents, confident, good, old-fashioned filmmaking, where you just have a good story and you tell it. And it is stylized, and you look at it and you can see David Lynch in it for sure. Certainly not in the rating, because you remember it's G-rated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not PG. It is G-rated.
I was gonna say it's like his sweet movie.
Yes.
And it hit me, man. Pulled my heartstrings, right? Got me right in the lamps. I thought it was just beautiful.
It does remind me a lot of The Elephant Man, incidentally. Not just in the ending, because remember Elephant Man, they both end the same way with stars. Remember John Merrick at the end lays down to die at the end of Elephant Man. He's sleeping like a normal person for the first time ever, but knowing that he's also going to die in his sleep by doing that. And then you see the stars. And then The Stray Story has the same thing, where at the end they look up and there are the stars. So yeah, there are a lot of those sort of tying little things that tie one another together in all of Lynch's work, thematically and visually, in a lot of ways. But yes, I definitely wanted to work in The Straight Story. I think in our final minutes, since we only really have one more film to go, I'll just say that Inland Empire, which was made in 2006, is one of the most baffling David Lynch films I've ever seen. It's dark, it's violent, it's scary, and it's perplexing in a way that I cannot fathom. Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, these are films that you can look at and you can decipher. I couldn't even tell you how to begin to decipher Inland Empire, which is a film that he shot like Eraserhead over the course of many years, shot it on DV tapes, just with himself and a small crew around him. And Laura Dern, quite a few actors were in it, came out and did it just because Lynch was doing it. And he didn't have a script. He said it was the last time he would ever work like that again. He just sort of did a bunch of random things and hoped they all fit together. And the resulting movie is about 3 hours long, which has some remarkably great extras on the DVD. I have the DVD, and I've watched the movie, and I've come to appreciate it. The first time I watched it, I have to be honest, I got an hour and a half into it, and I was like, I'm only halfway through. But I've since kind of learned how to just sort of delve into the film and not try to figure it out. It's just its thing. It's just Inland Empire. Have you guys, Rebecca, did I force you to watch that?
Yes.
Did I really?
I think you did, yes. Yes, you did.
I don't remember all the time.
Most of his movies I've seen are because you were like, I've got the DVD or I'm renting this. Now, Mulholland Drive, we found it in the college library, remember?
That's right. And
we watched it in the library, in the little film room they had.
At any moment, we were afraid somebody was going to walk in right at the bow, chow, right when the camera goes over and you see her completely topless, and it's like that porno music kicked in. We were like, right now, some little old librarian's going to walk in. And like, what are you kids doing in here watching this pornography?
Well, what do they have it in the library?
That's right. But that is true. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that there are certain things that I'm very proud of. One of them is that I forced Rebecca to watch all of David Lynch's films. And
well, there were a few I had already seen. You know, my sister and my mom, but you made me watch the rest of them. Yes.
and most of them you liked, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the ones I saw with my mom and my sister my mom liked Elephant Man. My mom and I watched Straight Story together. My sister was Blue Velvet and Lost Highway.
Yeah.
And
Chaney, have
Twin
you?
Peaks.
Of course, yes. Which I can't wait to do the Twin Peaks show. But Chaney, I got to ask you: have you seen Inland Empire?
I have not, man. I have not. As a matter of fact, I hadn't even heard of it until just now.
I'm going to bring it with me when we shoot on location, and you and I are going to sit down for 3 hours, and we're going to watch Inland Empire.
All right.
Because if you like David Lynch, I want you to see this movie just to get your reaction to it. Because I'll be honest with you, Inland Empire, if you're not a hardcore Lynch fan, I would say watch Lost Highway.
Yeah.
Watch Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
Because, if Inland Empire is for a Lynch fan.
It's very tedious because you don't know what the heck's going on.
I can dig it. Like I'm fascinated with the way he sees things, Like I dig that.
Some of his stuff, you just have to think, I'm watching a painting.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, the moving painting thing, I think, is a great analogy for a lot of his material. But anyway, we have gone a little bit over time. But like I said, we had a lot of movies to talk about, and we really only scraped the surface of many of them. We're going to talk more about David Lynch, I'm sure, in the future, and more about Twin Peaks as things go along. But for now, I think it's time to wrap up. So I want to thank you, Chaney, for being here.
Oh, man, my pleasure. Always a pleasure.
And I want to thank you, Rebecca, as always, for being here.
Sure thing.
And I want to thank all you guys for watching. And until next time, take care of yourselves.